Hello again. We're back to do another session on the Hellenistic philosophers. Today's topic is the Stoics. And we will be talking about Stoicism. This was the most popular of the Hellenistic philosophies, and also the Christians really dug on these folks and utilized a lot of their philosophy in the early Christian era. They liked them so much that they forged or falsified documents or letters between Seneca, one of the more famous of the Stoics, and Paul, one of the later writers in the Bible, the New Testament. But we'll get to that in a bit. So, starting with the name, Stoics come from the word in ancient Greek stoa, or porch. These are the porch philosophers. They hung out on the porches of temples and other, sort of homes and domiciles and places like that, and they, spat some philosophy. It was also inclusive, revolutionary, in fact, because they allowed women and slaves and foreigners and all sorts of other people to be involved in this philosophy. It was considered a philosophy for all, regardless of your walk of life, place in life, ethnicity, sex, creed, color, etc. Well, your creed has got to be Stoic, but same sort of thing. Okay, so the founder is Zeno of Citium, not to be confused with Zeno of the Paradoxes. I know you were thinking that. He was one of our pre-Socratic philosophers, but it's Zeno of Citium or Zeno of the Stoa or Zeno the Stoic. Any of those will suffice to disambiguate him from the other Zeno. And he lived from 334 BCE to 262 BCE. He claims that Socrates was the progenitor of their philosophy as well. That seems odd. I thought the Cynics said that. And then, of course, there was Plato, who would famously always think of as being Socrates' voice. And the skeptics are going to claim, the academic ones, Socrates as well. And the Pyrrhonians will claim Pyrrho instead. But again, a lot of people are rooting their philosophy back to Socrates. So when we say, oh, Socrates says, or this, that, and the other, well, who's Socrates? The Stoic Socrates, the Cynic Socrates, the academic Socrates, or Plato's Socrates, or the historical Socrates. So again, we end up in a weird situation with Socrates, and mostly again, people just think of Socrates as being Plato's version of him. Okay, but let's leave that aside. We talk enough about him. Zeno was from Cyprus and was a very well-off, wealthy individual, probably a noble or something along those lines. He left Cyprus to come to Athens when he was young, and he taught while he was there the whole time. Seneca, another very famous Stoic philosopher. I'm going to read a little bit from him at the end. He was an advisor to Emperor Nero of Rome. Now, Nero was famed for being just a totally mad emperor. I mean, like he was insane and just very vicious and brutal and just kind of an awful human being, probably mentally impaired in some way or something like that. But he grew up in all luxury with no restraint, and everything was given to him that ever he wanted or requested. At a certain point, he claimed he made it be legally binding that if you were battling on stage in a play, that you had to actually battle. And if there was a death scene, you had to kill the other actor. Or if there was a sex scene, you actually had to have sex on stage, or something along those lines. They also claim that he played his fiddle while Rome burned. That's not true, probably, but the idea is that he didn't do very much when there was a great fire that, or conflagration that was consuming Rome, and he really did a very poor job of handling or managing that. But Nero was the type of person that would like torture folks or force people to do awful things. And Stoics, and the reason I bring this up is Stoics would say you don't ever want to do the awful thing, even if the tyrant claims that they'll kill your whole family. You should still never do the wrong thing or go against virtue, because virtue is everything. It is the most important thing that you can try and achieve or accomplish. So even if at the cost of your own death, you ought to choose that over doing something sinister or vicious. Epictetus was a slave. He's one of the most famous Stoics, and he has the most extent stuff that we have written in Enchiridion, which is just the handbook. Sometimes it's just referred to as the handbook, the Stoic handbook. I think I might have a copy of it on my shelf, actually. But it doesn't really matter. It's just, we're going to be reading from that today. I'm actually probably not even going to really look at your book that much. The quotes I'm bringing, some of them will be in your book, some of them won't. He eventually saved up enough money to buy his way out of slavery and had his own freedom, had his own school. But again, as I pointed out in an earlier lecture, philosophers have tended to be ultra wealthy or slaves in the history of things, as they are teachers of a certain sort, or researchers or people who learn things. So the Epicureans also, I didn't mention this last time, but they were in favor of moderation. Aristotle was in favor of moderation. Almost all of the ancient Greeks were in favor of moderation. And again, as I had said earlier, there's two things carved in stone above the temple at Delphi, for the oracle at Delphi, the locus of all truth in the ancient Greek world. And those two things that are written over there are Seaton Nostai, know thyself, and nothing in excess, or to say it in other ways, all things in moderation. So the Greeks talk about moderation, moderation, moderation. The Stoics say it's not about moderation, actually, because that means that you could do some things moderately bad or have some moderately unvirtuous action and still be considered good. And pleasure is especially dangerous here. So they said the good life is not consisting in moderation or pleasure, but the good life is found in virtue. So let's talk about the Stoics a little bit more. What's interesting here also is Marcus Aurelius is also one of our most famous Stoics. He actually writes pretty simply because he didn't get, he wasn't a philosopher for a very long time, I think into his teens, but then one of his other brothers died, and he became emperor. Like, he wasn't supposed to be emperor. He was like, I don't know, 4th or 5th down the line or something like that to be emperor. So they just like shoved him into a school to learn some philosophy instead of training him up to be the emperor. But then his other brothers died, and they're like, all right, you're up to bat. You're now the emperor. And if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, starring Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, at the very beginning of that movie, the emperor that's featured that supposedly gave the reins of the city over to Maximus is Marcus Aurelius. So he famously is in that movie Gladiator. It's kind of a cult classic, so you may have actually seen that one. It's kind of old. But at any rate, so what's interesting about all of this is this, that Epictetus was a slave. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor. Seneca was an advisor to an emperor. Zeno was, some nobleman from Cyprus. But basically anyone could be a Stoic. As I said earlier, it was an inclusive philosophy. Our first female philosophers were also Stoic philosophers and things like that. So again, this is odd because we wouldn't have included these people before, but now we are including these people. In fact, Aristotle and Plato would have considered Zeno a savage because he came from Cyprus. In fact, even the word barbarian, literally in the ancient Greek, just means somebody who doesn't speak the Greek language. It may even be a slur to say that other people, when they speak non-Greek, it sounds like this: bar, 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 bar. So a barbarian is just literally somebody who doesn't speak Greek, because that's how they felt about these things. Okay, now let's get into their belief system a little bit more. Okay, so this is what's important. What is up to us and what is not up to us? Most importantly here are judgments. So this is the very first, let's call it aphorism or clip in the Enchiridion, or the handbook by Epictetus, and it goes like this, quote, Some things, this is also in your book, it's probably like in the first page or so, or second page or so of the Stoics. Some things are up to us, and some are not up to us. Our opinions are up to us, our impulses, desires, aversions. In short, whatever is our own doing. Our bodies are not up to us, nor our possessions, our reputations, or our public offices, or whatever is not your own doing. The things that are up to us are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded. The things that are not up to us are weak, enslaved, and hindered, and not our own. So remember, if you think things naturally enslaved are free, or that things not your own are your own, you'll be thwarted, miserable, and upset, and will blame both gods and men. But if you think that only what is yours, what is not your own is just as it is, not your own, then no one will ever coerce you. No one will hinder you. You will blame no one. You will not accuse anyone. You will not do a single thing unwillingly, and you will have no enemies, and no one will harm you because you will not be harmed at all. So, again, remember, this is going back to almost the Platonic understanding of harm, that you're the only one who can really harm yourself by doing bad things. Other people can't actually harm you as they claim. So, I forgot what's right here. Reputation. So, first of all, judgments are up to us, but we're going to get to that in a minute. And the judgments are really important. This is the core of what makes something free or not, or how we take the world. But our opinions are up to us. It's just whatever your opinion about the thing is, and that's free. You get to make your own opinions about things or not. Your impulses, whatever impulses you have, you're free to do them or not. And your desires are what you have chosen and are free, and so are your aversions. They're unimpeded and unhindered according to the Stoics, as opposed to your bodies. You are sexed male or female or intersexed from birth. If you don't know what intersex means, that's generally from olden times referred to as a hermaphrodite. If you don't know what that means, even more so, it's somebody who's born with some variety of both sex organs or both of the XY or X chromosomes who presents differently or something like that. There's a lot of different variations of people that are intersexed. If you're interested, there's a video that's free on Amazon Prime called Intersection, I want to say, and it's very interesting if you want to, because people oftentimes are like, what? You're either male or you're female. Nature. I'm like, well, nature decided some people are in between naturally. So 1 in 15,000 actually is what they claim, which is small. Like a small town might only have one or none. But if you look at the grand scheme of things, that's a lot of people born with ambiguous sexual organs, sexual sort of biology, as opposed to gender, which is a social construct. And whether or not these people decide on what particular types of genders they want to go with, it gets all over the place. But at any rate, I'm just saying your body's not really up to you. That starts a certain way. I mean, sure, we have medical procedures that can change your sex, sort of. Not entirely. I mean, a lot of the intersex people are actually infertile, but some of them are fertile, even with can give birth even with a penis, or even with not a vagina, or something along those lines. It's very strange how these things are. Some people have all of the like internal organs of a female, but present male external sex organs or something like that. Also, they claim under current science that your body, when it comes to like weight and dieting and shape, is about 80% genetic and about 20% fluctuating based on like stuff you do. So like, for instance, I have a cousin who she is from a stock of very tall, very broad-shouldered women. I've met her grandmother. She is tall and broad-shouldered. She kind of looks like Janet Reno, if you know who that is. If you don't, let's look back to the 90s. She was, I want to say, oh God, she was an important political figure. not Surgeon General, but Attorney Justice maybe or something like that. Anyway, um, but you know, she had weight problems. She has weight problems, or had whatever. She had issues with her weight for a long time, and then she started working out a lot, and she lost a lot of weight, and she got in shape, and now she knows a bunch of jujitsu and stuff, and she's in shape as much as she can get, but she's never going to be skinny or thin. Like we expect models to be currently in our paradigm that we exist in. That's just not in the cards for her. She can't be that way. I mean, I am, you know, a little bit short for a man, not particularly short. I'm like 5'8" or 5'9" or something like that, I think. Let me say 5'9". But at any rate, it doesn't matter. I'm not particularly long-legged, so even when I ran cross country, it was never going to be the possibility that I could, even with a lot of work, get to be the kind of person that could be the best long-distance runner. And you know, we see similar things in basketball. Even people that are short, that are really good at basketball, they're an anomaly, not, or like the exception, not the rule. And again, that 20% wiggle room is to say that some people can go really extreme, like if you look at my 600-pound life or something like that, or really extreme the other way, like anybody who's anorexic or something like that. And these things can happen, and it's, you know, the case that they can go that way. But generally speaking, your body type is not up to you. That's a thing that doesn't, that you can do a little bit with, but it's not entirely on you. Also, if you get injured in a work accident or a car accident or something like that, or your genes are just bad, and your lungs give out, or your heart does, or you know, something along those lines, you develop cancer as a child due to no fault of your own or doing, you know, this is the case that that's not up to you. I mean, even those commercials are like truth commercials, you know, about smoking, and they're like, I got cancer when I was 20 and I only smoked for 3 days. You know, I mean, they usually say a year or whatever. But that person was probably going to get cancer of the throat anyways, because of their genetics. It's not, I mean, because some people also smoke till they're 90 and die of like not stuff related to smoking. I mean, your genetics play a huge role in this. Your body's not entirely up to you. I used to smoke cigarettes. Oh, I love smoking cigarettes. The reason I stopped smoking cigarettes was because my lungs couldn't handle it anymore. They seized up and I just couldn't breathe every time I had a cigarette. Cigarette smoke still bothers me, but that's unfortunate because I like being around the smokers. They have better conversations generally outside, and I can corner people when they're smoking and talk to them individually. Back then, I met my fiance while having over a cigarette. I bummed one from her, even though I had one at the time, just because I wanted to strike up a conversation. So, at any rate, if my lungs were a little bit better, my body, you know, would be, if it were up to me, I would still be smoking probably. Your possessions, you think those are up to you if you work hard and you get stuff and whatever, if you hang on to it properly or treat it right, but things can disintegrate. People can steal your stuff. The government can take anything away they want. A guy with a large stick or a gun, or you know, anybody can take your possessions anytime. That's not really up to you. I mean, you can try as you might, but if you lose them, that's because it was going to happen, and you didn't have anything to do with that. Public offices, as hard as you might try and as much money as you might spend, you're not necessarily going to get it, and you might not have it bestowed upon you, and it's not necessarily, you know, going to work out how you want it to. And your reputation, while you may have something to do with it based on your actions or activities, you can have a bad reputation or a good one for no fault of your own. You may be considered a good person even though you're terrible, just people didn't know it. Or you might be considered to have a terrible reputation. Oh my God, they've had all sorts of sex with all sorts of people, or they did all sorts of bad things, and it might not be true at all. Rumors can ruin your reputation. And it doesn't matter if they're true or not. That's just the case. In fact, when I have office hours, I always keep my door open. I never have it shut with a student, because all it takes is somebody to accuse me of something untoward, and then my, you know, teaching career is basically ruined. It doesn't have to be substantiated in any way. All it has to have is somebody saying something like, that person, you know, assaulted me sexually or said something like that or whatever. And if I don't have my door open, then it, you know, is much more of a private setting, and I don't like that. I even have it be the case that when I have tests, you're the second to last person to finish your test, and we're in a room, because I let people go as they finish their tests. that you have to stay until the last person finishes, because I don't want to be with the last person finishing a test alone. Doesn't matter if you're male or female or whatever. I just don't want it to be the case that I'm alone for the sake of reputation, you know? Again, just, CYA for me. And he says that these things are weak, enslaved, and hindered, and the others are free, unimpeded, and unhindered. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird, because the Stoics believe in fate and destiny and the divine logos or divine reason or divine intelligence, and that everything is preordained and is going to happen in the way that it is. But there is some sort of freedom of opinion, impulse, desire, and aversion, or freedom of judgment, really. So it's kind of weird, and this is where we first start getting any sort of kind of understanding of freedom, even though they don't really believe in this sort of free will, volitional freedom that comes about in a robust form with Christianity in the Middle Ages. Also, notably, the Epicureans had something similar to this too. I didn't mention this in the Epicurean video, but the Epicureans, with Lucretius, changed the Democritean atomism slightly by adding the swerve into it. And the swerve is that atoms and void are all that exist. But if it were the case that they all existed all at the same time, all the same way, they would always just kind of not move or be exactly the same or fall apart. So they say that atoms randomly swerve occasionally, and this random swervingness causes fluctuations that are not entirely predictable. Some people like to liken it to subatomic particle theory and probabilistic theory like that. I think that that's a little anachronistic, but you could try and work with that if you wanted to. I don't like doing things like that because it's not like they had some sort of real conception of anything like that back then. But because of the swerve, people like to claim that there could be some sort of version of free will embedded in Epicureanism, although I don't think so, because if it's just random, then that's still, generally speaking, not what we mean by free will. If it's predictable and mechanistic and causal, i.e. cause then effect, that's not freedom. But if it's cause then possible effect A, B, C, or D, and you don't get to choose, it just happens randomly, that's also not freedom. So, the probabilistic spectrum doesn't make you better than the first version makes you a cognitive machine. The probabilistic spectrum makes you a random happening in the machine kind of sort of thing. Think of it more like electron clouds if you've ever taken a chemistry or physics class where they talk about the electron could be somewhere in this cloud area, but we don't know exactly where it is. And due to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, you can never really figure it out and its velocity at the same time. But that's not that important for right now. All I'm trying to say is this is the sort of the roots of where we start seeing what we want to say is the beginnings of the understanding of what we call free will, at least in the more modern understanding of that you were free to do otherwise, because the Stoics do not believe that you were free to do otherwise. They are pantheists. They believe in God, and God is everything. It is immanent, not transcendent. Immanent, not as in close by or near. That's immanent with the, I think, an A, not an E, or vice versa. I can't spell, so it's one or the other. But one of those, they're said the same way. So imminent and imminent are the same, whether it's spelled with an E or an A at the end. But the close by one, like imminent danger, dangerous close, is sort of similar to what immanence means, which is to say that it is internal or it is in you or something like that, whereas transcendent means outside of or above you or, overarching or something like that. And they wanted to claim that God was immanent and in everything. Pantheism, pan, meaning all, and theism, meaning God, that everything is God. I am God, you are God, the wall is God, air that we breathe is God, everything is part of God. Why? Well, God is perfect, right? We always go with that. And is God limited or unlimited? We always like to say unlimited. Is God bound by anybody else or anything else? Or is God unbound or unlimited? Well, if God is unbound and unlimited and not limited by anything else, then nothing can limit the power or the existence of God. So everything has to be within God. So, for instance, it's not something like there's God here, and then you over here, because this boundary is limits on God. In fact, this circle in general is a limitation on God. Even if you're like some sort of cross section of God, like the Venn diagram version, you, right, and you've got something to do with God or some layover, that's still not right. And it's not even right to say that you're just all part of God like this, because that still has limits. So God is more like, for the Stoics anyways, everything. We are all just part of the one divine intelligence or divine being that infinitely extends into space. And the Stoics claim that it will unfold in a divine and rational order or intelligence, and that everything is destined to happen. They believe in divine providence, and everything is how it should be. If you ever heard somebody say, God has a plan, or nothing, everything happens for a reason. Your grandmother might have told you this, or people say that this might be a blessing in this is a blessing in disguise, or something like that. The God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason. All this all goes back to a certain understanding of fate and the Stoics. And the Christians really liked this, by the way, especially the Calvinists who believe in predetermination or predestination. And they think that everybody is either saved or damned from the beginning, because God has already figured that all out, and that there is no free will. And there's not really free will here either. You are just one piece of God working itself out. We're like an atom in the fingernail of God. If you think about it in the sense of God being the entirety of the universe, you are just a minuscule part of it, like everything else. And that you think that something is good or bad is your judgment on that thing, that it's good or bad. And it's very small and very individual. And the reason that you think that it's good or bad is because you don't see the bigger picture. Since God is everything, and God is destined, and God is the divine intelligence, the divine reason for everything, the logos of all, that you think something is good or bad is your own small perspective, as opposed to it actually just being that it has to be that way because it is God and God is perfect. So everything happens the way that it's supposed to. Everything happens for a reason. You just think that it's bad because it's bad for you, and you have made the judgment that it's bad, and that is why you feel bad about it. Not that it is actually inherently bad, because everything has to be good, because everything is God, who is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and all powerful and all knowing, and all that stuff, and everywhere. So omnipresent. So the big O's, they call them the three big O's: omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent. So it has to be the way that it is on purpose. This is the way that it was meant to be. If you were born a slave, that's where you were meant to be. Don't be upset that your lot in life has relegated you to being a slave or poor. Or don't be upset that you were relegated to be emperor. Marcus Aurelius never wanted to be emperor. He didn't like the job. Or that you were born into money and you feel bad about it. Or maybe you have white guilt, or perhaps you feel bad because you're a second-class citizen, because you're an undocumented immigrant, or African-American in this country, or something like that. Or that you came from nothing, or that your parents were horrible, or that you were beaten or molested as a child, or raped, or that you have PTSD from some horrible thing that happened to you from your childhood, or going to war, or a variety of different things that could be bad, are just bad because of your judgments of them, not because they are inherently bad. That's your judgment that it is inherently bad when it is actually good. This very succinctly and very smoothly solves the problem of evil. There just isn't any. You just think that it's evil. Everything's supposed to be this way. So to read from the Enchiridion, or the handbook again, let's look at number 2. Remember that what a desire proposes is that you gain what you desire, and what an aversion proposes is that you do not fall into what you are averse to. Someone who fails to get what he desires is unfortunate, while someone who falls into what he is averse to has met misfortune. So if you are averse only to what is against nature among the things that are up to you, then you will never fall into anything that you are averse to. But if you are averse to illness or death or poverty, you will meet misfortune. So detach yourself from aversion, from everything up to us, and transfer it to what is against nature among the things that are up to us. And for the time being, eliminate desire completely, since if you desire something that is not up to us, You are bound to be unfortunate. And at the time, none of the things that are up to us, which it would be good to desire, will be available to you. Okay, so it finishes with make use of only impulse and its contrary rejection through with reservation lightly and without constraining. Okay, number 4, another good one. When you are about to undertake some action, remind yourself what sort of action it is. If you're going out to the bath, put before your mind what happens at baths. Baths were a big deal back in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. They had big bath houses that had heated hot springs or whatever, either natural or heated generally by slaves, billowing flames underneath marble. But they'd have hot baths, and people would go in there and just kind of hang out. There's still Russian bathhouses that are kind of like this too, and they're not just like prostitution rings or brothels or whatever. They're actually a place where a lot of people like to hang out. There still are bathhouses today that are actually just for bathing and hanging out and whatnot, although other stuff still went on at this point in time too. There will be people who splash, people who jostle, people who are insulting, people who steal. It's like going to the public pool. And you will undertake the action more securely if you start off and say of it, I want to take a bath and to keep my choices in accord with nature. And likewise for each action. For that way, if something happens to interfere with your bathing, you will be ready to say, oh, well, I wanted not only this, but also to keep my choices in accord with nature. And I cannot do that if I am annoyed with things that happen. It's like if you go to a concert and you're like, I don't really like crowds. Gonna have a bad time. All right. It's like if you're gonna go skiing and you're like, I don't like being cold. It's like, well, that's kind of what's gonna happen. It's gonna be cold. You're gonna get wet if you're going out to the pool, expect things to be the way that they're gonna be when you get there. Don't try to expect them to be perfect or better than they would be. There are certain things that come with particular stuff, and you should just expect that to be the case and not be upset about it when things go that way or go wrong. Somebody broke into my locker and stole all my stuff. Such is the reason why they have lockers in the first place, but also why we have locks, but also why we have bolt cutters. And people do that. I mean, it's the case. That's just how it works sometimes. If you have a bike at USF, it's likely to be stolen. I don't know very many people at USF who've had a bike that wasn't stolen. And those who haven't had their stolen, bring it inside to every single classroom or their office every single time. Now section 5 of the handbook by Epictetus. What upsets people is not the things themselves, but their judgments about the things. For example, death is nothing dreadful, or else it would have appeared dreadful to Socrates, right? Socrates would have thought it was bad, but he didn't say that, right? He said, suppose to me death is a blessing, right? And he gives a number of different things that were like that. We talked about this earlier in an earlier lecture. But instead, the judgment about death, it is the judgment about death that is dreadful. That is what is dreadful. So when we are thwarted or upset or distressed, let us never blame someone else, but rather ourselves. That is our own judgment. An uneducated person accuses others when he is doing badly. A partly educated person accuses himself. An educated person accuses neither himself nor someone else. So again, the point here is to say, and actually ancient Greek is a philosopher, neither accuses himself or someone else, but the translation here is a little off. But they prefer to say educated, although that's sort of what it means anyways. All right, so judgments are up to you. And it's not the thing that happens that's bad, it's your judgments. And I've said this before, but I'm gonna say it again. That's what's up to you. That's what makes the thing bad. Sure, it might hurt, but that was what it was meant to be. And if you say that it's bad, inherently, what you're saying is that God's plan for what's happening in the universe is wrong inherently somehow, and that's not right. Section 11 of the handbook. Never say about anything, I have lost it, but instead, I have given it back. Did your child die? It was given back. Did your wife die? She was given back. My land was taken, so this too was given back. But the person who took it was bad. How does the way of the giver asked for it to come back concern you? As long as he gives it, take care of it as something that is not your own, just as travelers treat an inn. now, not how current travelers treat an inn, which is like, let's trash this thing and treat it like it's a rented mule or something, but more like you should treat it with respect and nicety so that you can come back to the place. Because a rented room at inns, you would know the person who owned the place and they wouldn't let you come back if you messed up the place. So you should treat it well, but it's not your own. It's not your place. It's just a rented room, much like your wife or your kid or a jug or your land. If it breaks or they die or something like that, it's not up to you. It is being taken back. This is another one of those things that sounds sort of Christian religious-y. The Christians really liked this one, particularly. All right, number 12. If you want to make progress, give up all considerations like these. If I neglect my property, I will have nothing to live on. If I do not punish my slave boy, he will be bad. It is better to die of hunger with distress and fear gone than to live upset in the midst of plenty. It is better for the slave boy to be bad than for you to be in a bad state. Begin therefore with the little things. A little oil is spilt, a little wine is stolen. No crying over spilt milk. You might have heard that before. Say, this is the price of tranquility. The Greek here, of course, is ataraxia or ataraxia. This is the price of equanimity, of calmness of soul. This is the price of not being upset. Nothing comes for free. When you call the slave boy, keep in mind that he is capable of paying no attention. And even if he does pay attention, he is capable of not doing any of the things that you want him to. But he is not in such a good position that your being upset or not depends on him. So that you're upset or not by other people's actions is on you, not the person not following your orders or not doing the actions you want. Now, we're talking about slavery, so that's bad. Let's just say inherently. And let's just talk about maybe your subordinates at work or your children or anybody else that's supposed to listen to you. When they don't, you shouldn't get upset, according to the Stoics. It's not up to you whether they follow your orders or not. It's not up to you whether or not they do what you want. And if they make you upset by not doing that, that's on you for having a judgment that that's what's going on. This perturbedness, this upsetness, this anger and anxiety, he says, is far worse than you have living in the lap of luxury, but being very anxious and upset about everything and worried about things all the time. That's not how you should be living if you want to be stoic and you want to have tranquility, if you want to have ataraxia, if you want to be happy, to have the good life. All right, 16. When you see someone weeping in grief at the departure of his child or the loss of his property, take care not to be carried away by the appearance that the externals he is involved in are bad, and be ready to say immediately, what weighs down on this man is not what has happened, since it does not weigh down on someone else, but it is his judgment about it. Do not hesitate, however, to sympathize with him verbally and even to moan with him on occasion if it arises, but be careful not to moan inwardly. So he's saying, yeah, it's good to sympathize with people, but don't let it bother you. Don't allow their judgment of the thing being bad to make you feel bad. Section 20, he says, remember that what is insulting is not the person who abuses you or hits you, but the judgment about them that they are insulting. So when someone irritates you, be aware that what irritates you is your own belief. Most importantly, therefore, try not to be carried away by appearance, since if you once gain time and delay, you will control yourself more easily. So again, he's saying here, your judgment is what makes it bad. If somebody insults you or says nasty stuff about your mother or whatever, it's your judgment, not their insults, that's harming you. Most of the time when people say nasty stuff to me, I just kind of ignore it. There's no reason to get all up and hot and bothered about it. It really doesn't do you much good. I mean, unless other people are being influenced and swayed by it, I really don't care what you have to say about me. Okay, you said some mean things, and so what? I mean, it hurts worse when it comes from people that you care about, trust, love, or respect. But still, at the end of the day, I mean, sticks and stones, they break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And even the sticks and stones really don't hurt you, according to the Stoics. You just think, I mean, like, they hurt you literally physically, but I mean, that's still what was intended to happen. That's where you were meant to be. That's how it was supposed to unfold. Section 22. If you crave philosophy, prepare yourself on the spot to be ridiculed, to be jeered at by many people who will say, here he is again, all of a sudden turned philosopher on us. And where did he get that high brow? But don't you put on a high brow, but hold fast to the things that appear best to you, and as someone assigned by God to his place. And remember that if you hold to these views, those who previously ridiculed you will later be impressed with you. But if you are defeated by them, you will be doubly ridiculed. And it's true. I mean, when I tell people I'm a philosopher or that I teach college philosophy or something like that, and I mean, I am a philosopher. I write philosophy. I'm trying to get published. I have a published dissertation. I'm published in some online stuff too, with the American Philosophical Association. I do philosophy, mostly on comedy and authenticity and free will. Heidegger, Nietzsche, and Aristotle, and also the philosophy of art. But people do ridicule and jeer you and say, "Oh, philosophy. What are you going to do with that?" And I'm like, what are you going to do with any of the degrees that you get in school? I mean, unless you're literally going to be a lab scientist, your biology degree is just as worthless as my philosophy degree. Your STEM degree is not useful unless you're going into a STEM field. And your business degree is pretty much worthless, sorry if you're in business school, because you can learn all the stuff you need to know about business by actually just doing the practice of business. Now, some places might pay you more starting off if you have the business degree, but as it turns out, if you look at the statistics, and I do mean this is serious, look it up, people who get a BA in philosophy over the course of time, say a 10-year period, end up making more money in business than people who got a business degree out the gate. The people who got the business degree to start with start off making more money to begin with, but over the course of time, the philosophy degree actually has more value. Why, you might ask? Well, because you were taught to think critically, think outside of the box, and to be able to read difficult texts and materials, which will help you out in business so that you're not bamboozled, flim-flammed, or, on the contrary, you can utilize logic, reason, and fallacies to bamboozle and inveigle other people if you so choose to use this in an evil way, if you will. But also, you can be more convincing if you have logic on your side and the ability to sway them with their emotions and credibility and other things like that. So again, it might be a multi-pronged approach, but it's better when you have everything working for you than just the non-logical stuff. Okay, so carrying on. Here are the last couple of ones that I'm going to give you. Again, these ones are some of the ones that I'm not the biggest fan of. It says, if you're at a, eating or drinking with folks, he says, divert by your own talk, if you can, the talk of those with you to something appropriate. So don't talk about inappropriate stuff. This is 33 in the handbook by Epictetus. If you happen to be stranded among strangers, do not talk. Do not laugh a great deal or at a great many things, or unrestrainedly. Refuse to swear oaths. Don't make promises. You might not be able to keep them. Although, altogether if possible, or otherwise as circumstances allow. Avoid banquets given by those outside of philosophy. But if the appropriate occasion arises, take great care not to slide into their ways, since certainly if a person's companion is dirty, the person who spends time with him, even if he happens to be clean, is bound to become dirty too. This actually goes all the way back to the Platonic thing in the Apology, where he asked the question of Miletus, Socrates in his defense, asked the question of Miletus, does being around base or wicked people harm those around them? And the answer that Miletus gives is yes. Of course, Socrates doesn't quite weigh in on this, but I mean, the answer you usually think is, birds of a feather flock together. If you lay down with dogs, you get fleas, etc. And as the Stoics say, if you're hanging around dirty people, they're going to make you dirty too. There's something to be said for this, but then again, there's also stuff to be said against it. I mean, like, if you're a Christian proselytizing amongst the sinners, don't you think the sinners might harm you since they're technically bad or base, or you're trying to make them better, but they're not? At any rate, take what has to do with the body to the point of bare need, such as food, drink, clothing, household slaves. Bare need, bare minimum of slaves. That's what you should have, because you need a few slaves, obviously, right? And cut out everything that is for reputation or luxury. As for sex, stay as pure as far as possible before marriage. And if you have to do it, only do what is allowable. But do not be angry or censorious of those who do engage in it, and do not always be making an exhibition of the fact that you do not. So he's like, don't make a big deal about it, but stay away from sex as much as possible if you can before marriage. The Christians, again, really did like and appreciate this sort of stuff. All of the things I just said. Also, the Bible has a number of passages that are almost exactly the same as that. Especially about the laughter. They don't take kindly to that very much in the Bible. But at any rate, or material possessions. I mean, there is of course that parable where the person says to Jesus, "Oh, how can I be more like you? What can I do?" And he's like, "Give away all of your stuff and follow me." And he's like, "Is there anything else I could do that wasn't giving away all my stuff and being poor and following you in your ways? Because I'd like to still have all that money and property and stuff." But at any rate, carrying on, this is the same section. He says this: when you are about to meet someone, especially someone who seems to be distinguished, put to yourself the question, what would Socrates or Zeno have done in these circumstances? WWSD, what would Socrates do? Sort of like when people say, what would Jesus do, And you will be at a loss. You will not be at a loss as to how to deal with the occasion. Carrying down a little further, he says, stay away from raising a laugh, since this manner slips easily into vulgarity, and at the same time is liable to lessen your neighbor's respect for you. It is also risky to fall into foul language. I'm never really a big fan of the Stoics, partially because of what's called quietism. You are where you are because you were meant to be there. Don't cause a stir. Don't make a fuss. Don't be upset that you're a slave, or that there's social injustice, or that things are wrong, or that there is slavery in the first place, or exploitation of workers on a massive scale, or American imperialism, or Soviet imperialism, or American exceptionalism, or more like U.S. exceptionalism, because technically the Americas extend to South America and Mexico and Central America and Canada. But at any rate, again, quietism is basically this sort of like, you shouldn't cause a stir or make a ruckus about stuff. And I have fought the good fight my whole life for unions and for causes and for all sorts of other things, and for equality and justice and things like that. I don't even necessarily have I have a certain bone to pick with equality and stuff, but it's not that, it's that nobody actually is equal. We're all different biologically, physiologically, our natures, our upbringings. A never even equals A, so you can't make anyone equal, and equal generally means equal to a particular standard, and in our society that particular standard is a middle-aged white male, and if not that, then you're somehow being disadvantaged if you're not in that place of being a middle-class white male of some sort. Because there are disadvantages to being basically everything else, except for a very rich white male. Because you have to overcome other stuff. And in this country, standardly speaking, also Christian of some Protestant faith, because even Catholics are discriminated against, and Lutherans and Calvinists and all sorts of other stuff. But at any rate, I don't like this. I like to stir the pot. I get angry. And while your judgments may be somewhat up to you, I don't necessarily know that your desires are up to you. Whether I desire chocolate or vanilla isn't exactly up to me. Whether I desire women or men or both or neither isn't really up to me. I either just desire that or I don't. Um, again, people are like, but you act upon, and I'm like, that's different too. And these guys believe in fate, so your actions aren't really up to you anyways, just your judgments and your opinions and desires and aversions. And your aversions aren't necessarily up to you either. Through a lot of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, we've discovered that aversions might be subconscious, or you might not know that they're going on or something like that, because of something that may have happened to you in the past. And impulses are literally impulses, and I'm not sure that you can control your impulses, at least the thoughts of them, but maybe controlling the actions possibly. But again, that implies that you have some sort of free will and that it's not divine or destined what's going to happen. So it's kind of weird on like how free actually is this. Are we actually free at all? Do we have the ability to control our desires and opinions? And all this talk about nature and wanting what's natural also is where the Stoics get off saying that you shouldn't have fancy hairdos and that you should grow it out to be natural and have a big beard because that's what's natural for man to have, and shouldn't pluck one's hairs of one's face to look like a young boy, or curl one's hair, or perfume oneself because that's unnatural. And they were actually the first people to really get into saying that homosexuality goes against nature, from the Stoic philosopher Musonius, who claimed that it was an unnatural thing. As we know now, homosexuality is pretty natural. It shows up not only in humans naturally all over the place, somewhere between 10 and 15% across the board, generally speaking, if not more or less in some places. But like amongst lots of different animals, like 20% of all seagulls are homosexual or gay or whatever you want to call it. Penguins can do this, lions do this, dogs do this, all sorts of animals, dolphins. And if you want to get real serious, our closest genetic relative, the bonobo chimp, they are all over the sexual spectrum when it comes to stuff like that. Just look up bonobo chimps. They are salacious and super sexual. The females are pretty much in charge, and the males try to bribe the females into having sex with them all the time, and the females utilize sex as a way to control the rest of the tribe or group of chimps. And there's lots, and anytime there's stress or turmoil within the pack or tribe or whatever of bonobo chimps, everybody has an orgy to release some stress and make things easier. Bonobos are hypersexualized. Just look into them. They're very interesting. And again, our closest genetic relative. There aren't a lot of them left. They're also sometimes referred to as pygmy chimps. Not a ton of them left. They're super smart. They're the best at the sign language and stuff too. Yeah, they're also the best to do testing on if we want to, look at stuff that might be effective on humans. But it's debatable whether we should be doing that. And on a further note, to get back at what Stoicism means today, when people say that somebody's rather stoic, what they mean is that they're not very emotional. They don't get all bent out of shape about stuff, nor do they get too excited about things. If you get too excited about things, it's showing too much emotion, and it's going to be problematic, because if something's really awesome and then it stops being the case that it's happening, then you're sad when it's gone, or you're upset that it's happening. Seneca is famous for saying, pray that you never have your best day, because it's all downhill from there. If you have the best day of your life, what else do you got to look forward to? So don't get too excited. Don't get too happy about anything in particular. Just try to get that nice level of tranquility going, right? It doesn't matter if it's really great or if it's really bad. Just be tranquil. Again, if you're at a funeral and someone says that you're being stoic, that means that you're not really showing much emotion, because, as he said, so it goes. It's how it was meant to be. God has a plan. It's a blessing in disguise. It's what was supposed to happen all along, right? Everything happens for a reason, or something along those lines. Now, also, because these are not Christians and we're in the ancient Greek era, rational suicide is considered a very viable option if bad stuff is going on. Famously, one of these people, I think it was Seneca, said that if you're in a kitchen and the smoke is at all tolerable, stay in, but if not, leave, which is to say, kill oneself. Now, before we carry on with what I'm about to read to you and finish up the Stoics, do not kill yourself. Please do not kill yourself. If you are suicidal or feeling that way, please contact the services at HCC. They have a number of them, or someone else. If you contact me, I'm a mandatory reporter, so I have to tell the school. It's not a huge deal. They'll just call you and ask you how you're doing. But I do have to tell them that you were saying stuff like that. And if you're feeling like that's going on, don't do it. Don't be rash. Just don't. So please, that's my caveat. We're going to talk about some pretty heavy stuff in the future in this class as well. It's going to be about nihilism. And that's also going to maybe make you feel depressed or weird. And again, I'm just very serious. Don't do anything rash. Hold yourself together. In fact, Descartes is going to specifically address this problem, I think, in your next reading or so that's coming up. But when we talk about freedom and what you're forced to do or something like that, this is Seneca from his book from some of his moral essays and political essays. And this is his section on anger, book 3. And he says this, again, this is during the time of Nero, where the emperor would command people to do all sorts of awful things, like that kind of William Tell stuff, where you get your kid and set him up and put an apple on his head and say, all right, now shoot the arrow off his head and hope you don't hit your kid, kind of deal, for the amusement or enjoyment of, the emperor or something. So if you're the greatest bowman, you might want to not let that be known. So carrying on, he says this: we are not going to advise men to endure the butcher's commands. Now, butcher here isn't like the guy who makes your meat. Butcher as in like butcher of the horde, or like, some sort of horrible human being. We shall simply show that in any slavery, the way lies open to freedom. One's affliction is mental, the misery one's own fault. If one can put an end to it together with oneself, I shall say both to man with luck to have a king, and luck here is, of course, being sarcastic, with the luck to have a king who shoots arrows at the heart of his friends, and to him whose master gorges the father with the entrails of his son, like the master of a slave making him eat his children. Why the groans, madman? Why wait for an enemy to avenge you through the downfall of your nation, or for some mighty monarch to swoop down from afar? Slavery, generally speaking, in the ancient Greek world, not to mention the Roman world, came from being defeated in combat when your city-state went up against another city-state and lost. Then you were given the option to become a slave or to fall on your sword. Most people chose to become slaves rather than kill themselves, but they always gave you the option: you can kill yourself or you can be a slave. So this is, again, what Seneca's getting at. Wheresoever you cast your eyes, there lies an end to your affliction. Look at that precipice, that cliff. Down it runs the way to freedom. Look at that sea out there, the river, the well. At its bottom lies your freedom. Look at the tree, short and shriveled and barren. There on it hangs your freedom. Look at your throat, your windpipe, your heart. All are ways to escape from slavery. But perhaps the way out which I have shown is too toilsome for you, too demanding on your spirit and strength. Are you asking for the road to freedom? Take any vein, that also means a road, in your body, if you like. So long, however, as nothing seems so unbearable as to drive us from life, we should rid ourselves of anger, whatever our situation in life may be. So that's the thing. If you can't, if it's too hot, get out of the kitchen. But if not, don't get angry about shit. Don't feel bad about it. Just either endure it or don't. But don't do the vicious action. Don't gorge yourself on your son's entrails. Don't play William Tell with your son because the emperor has demanded it. Don't kill somebody in combat on stage for theatrical effect. Don't murder someone if the emperor claims that they'll kill your whole family if you don't. Stoics would say that rational suicide is the better option here. And even in something like the play by Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Portia, Brutus's wife, and Brutus being the friend of Caesar, who is also part of the conspiracy to kill Caesar, is keeping this secret, and his wife knows it because she can tell that he's keeping a secret. And she says, "You can trust me. You can tell me. Look at my self-afflicted wound." And she shows that she has stabbed herself in the thigh to show that she is a Stoic and that she is not showing emotion and that she can keep a secret. That's a good Stoic woman, right? And then later she ends up killing herself by swallowing hot coals to show just how Stoic she is. Ooh, would not be my choice on the way to exit. But again, the Stoics were famed for making these sorts of rational suicidal decisions because everybody in the ancient Greek and Roman world goes to the same sort of lukewarm hell or Hades. And it's not a matter of if you did good or bad or if you killed yourself, where you go. You just go there. Unless you directly offended the gods, in which case then you might go to the pit in Tartarus where they'll have some special punishment arranged for you. But again, it's not good to die necessarily according to regular Greek religions. But the Stoics and the Epicureans and the skeptics all say, and also Plato and Socrates, it appears, all say you really shouldn't fear death. It's not really going to be a big deal for you, especially if you're a virtuous human. And you shouldn't allow yourself to become an unvirtuous or vicious human being as a result of the commands of the butcher, of the mad king, of the awful emperor, or the tyrant, or the dictator, or whomever. You should not do the evil or the wrong thing just because you're under duress. One should be good and virtuous because it is the right thing to do, and you should have judgments that go along with that. Do not want what is not up to you. Only want what you can control, which is your judgments about things. Okay, so once again, not a big fan of these folks, but if you want to feel a sense of real tranquility, these guys are pretty much the best for that. Saying everything happens for a reason, that God has a plan, makes people feel comfortable and okay with the wiles and woes and misfortunes and twists and turns of fate that may befall you. So Stoicism is actually quite useful for dealing with your life. A lot of people come to me after or during my class to ask me questions as though I were a priest or a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I am none of those things. I cannot give you that kind of advice about your life. But if you ask me, what to read further, I'll ask you, what are you looking for? Now, if you want therapy, if you want something that's therapeutically useful to you, I very frequently recommend reading the Stoics. They make you feel better about bad stuff happening. If you want how I really think things are, I'll direct you to the existentialists, and they'll tell you that you're responsible for everything, that you are, in fact, doomed to be free, and that you were always guilty and always responsible, even for your own face. The famous philosopher Albert Camus once said, "Every morning when you wake up and look in the mirror, the question that you should ask yourself is, do I continue or do I kill myself? And if you say I continue, then you have made a choice, a free will choice, to remain and be responsible for you and your actions in your entire life." All right, on that happy note, that is the end of happiness for the Stoics. Ataraxia, calmness of soul. Don't let the bastards get you down. All right, have a good one.